Imagine vanishing without a trace on a lonely Scottish road, your screams drowned by the sea, your flesh destined for the hooks of a cannibal family hidden deep within the coastal caves, a family so ruthless that over 1,000 men, women, and children simply disappeared into the shadows of medieval Scotland. This isn't folklore, nor the script of a horror movie, but one of the darkest true crime stories ever recorded in human history. A saga so drenched in blood that it still rattles historians and dark history researchers today. In the annals of human darkness, few names send a chill down the spine, quite like the Bean clan, the cannibal family whose 25-year reign of terror transformed Scotland's rugged coast into a graveyard and entire communities into ghost towns. This is the story that has haunted true crime enthusiasts, history buffs, and lovers of unsolved mysteries for centuries. A story nestled somewhere between terrifying reality and myth, a story soaked in the blood and secrets of a land caught between the medieval age and the Renaissance. It was the early 1400s, and Scotland was a realm teetering on the brink of chaos, torn between old feudal loyalties and emerging royal authority, where political instability provided fertile ground for darkness to flourish. Amid this turbulence emerged Alexander Sawney Bean, a man born into the harsh poverty of East Lothian, whose violent nature seemed less like a product of circumstance and more like a dark force unto itself. Unlike common bandits who preyed on travelers along perilous routes, Bean chose to sever himself entirely from society, forging a hidden kingdom of horror, where cannibalism became a way of life and terror an art form. And when he joined forces with Agnes Douglas, a woman whispered about in taverns for her connection to witchcraft and murder, their union was less a marriage than a pact with darkness. Together they vanished from the eyes of civilization, seeking a place where no laws could reach them. A fortress where the sea itself would swallow the cries of their victims, and where human flesh would become sacred sustenance. This is not merely a gruesome tale. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes humanity's most horrifying monsters are entirely human. A reality that fuels endless searches on YouTube for terms like cannibal family dark history, true crime, and Scotland horror story. Because the legacy of Sawney Bean still claws at the fragile walls of civilization itself. Scotland, in the early 1400s, was a kingdom caught in a brutal tug-of-war between the shadows of the medieval age and the fragile glow of the Renaissance. A land where castles loomed over desolate moors, where feudal lords plotted rebellions in smoky halls, and where political instability cracked the very bones of society, leaving space for monsters both human and supernatural to crawl forth. It was an era soaked in uncertainty, where whispers of treachery traveled faster than the biting wind rolling off the North Sea, and where every forest path or coastal road could become a stage for robbery, murder, or even darker horrors. The reign of King James I was marred by endless conspiracies, rival factions vying for power, and an economy strained to the breaking point by constant conflict and plague. Merchants trudging along trade routes carried not just bolts of cloth or barrels of salted fish, but rumors of entire caravans vanishing without a trace, fueling fears that some unseen predator was feasting on the lifeblood of Scotland itself. Travelers disappeared so often that their absence was almost mundane, dismissed as casualties of bandits, wolves, or the treacherous landscape that could swallow horse and rider whole. The countryside lay scarred by the 100 Years' War border skirmishes with England and internal feuds that bled villages dry. Meanwhile, religious fervor crackled through churches and taverns alike, where priests thundered sermons about the wrath of God and villagers whispered about witchcraft and devilry lurking in the dark corners of Scotland's wild terrain. Yet amidst this turbulence, no one could imagine that beneath the craggy cliffs of Galloway, an entire family was thriving in secrecy, transforming hunger into ritual and murder into the fabric of daily life. This is where the dark history of Scotland shifts from brutal politics and everyday violence to a story that still claws at the edges of human comprehension. A story that true crime aficionados, historians, and seekers of unsolved mysteries keep digging up century after century, trying to separate legend from horrifying fact. Because unlike other tales of bandits or murderers that plagued medieval Scotland, the saga of the Bean clan was something entirely different, a systematic reign of terror carried out over 25 years, orchestrated with chilling precision and driven by an appetite that went far beyond simple theft or revenge. The political chaos that left regions lawless created perfect cover for predators willing to step outside all bounds of human morality. Predators who didn't merely kill but consumed body and soul, leaving not even bones behind in some cases. Merchants, pilgrims, and lonely travelers were the perfect prey, their disappearances lost in the noise of a kingdom too distracted to look closely. In those days, Scotland's coastal regions were wild, rugged, riddled with hidden caves and tidal inlets where the sea could erase evidence twice daily, making it the ultimate hiding place for a cannibal family. And while the courts of Edinburgh buzzed with legal debates and royal decrees, while chroniclers inked their quills with tales of noble feuds and battlefield heroics, no scribe was writing down what was festering in the shadows of Galloway, a subterranean kingdom of blood and flesh. It's in this crucible of turmoil and darkness that the seeds were sown for one of the most chilling true crime sagas in human history, a tale so grotesque that it continues to dominate dark history channels and true crime documentaries on YouTube, drawing millions of viewers desperate to peer into the abyss of humanity's most forbidden urges. But even amidst such chaos, no one could have foreseen that a man named Alexander Sawney Bean and his equally monstrous wife Agnes Douglas would carve out their own civilization beneath the rocks, forging a hidden empire where cannibalism became not just survival, but sacred ritual, and where the laws of God and man held no power. And what they built in those shadowy chambers would grow into a nightmare so vast that it would eventually force the entire kingdom to acknowledge the existence of monsters born not from legend, but from the darkness within mankind itself. Yet even this backdrop of political chaos and superstition only sets the stage for the unimaginable horrors to come, because the true descent into terror begins when Sawney Bean takes his first steps toward a life utterly severed from human civilization, a step that will echo through Scotland's dark history forever. In a land where the winds carried secrets and the ocean sang dirges for the lost Alexander Sawney, Bean was born into a life already weighed down by darkness, emerging from the harsh poverty of East Lothian Scotland in an age when survival was often carved out through brutality and the sharp edge of a blade. But even in a country where violence lurked behind every hedgerow, there was something singular and unsettling about Sawney Bean, a restlessness in his blood that seemed to pulse with an appetite for chaos, a flicker in his eyes that hinted at an abyss far deeper than mere hunger. Unlike countless young men shaped by hardship who turned to petty theft or joined the ranks of roving bandits haunting Scotland's perilous roads, Sawney Bean was destined for something far darker, driven not merely by want, but by a desire to sever himself entirely from the laws and moral codes that tethered lesser men. And into this gathering storm stepped Agnes Douglas, a woman whose very name crept through tavern whispers like a chill draft, tangled in rumors of witchcraft blood sacrifices, and an aura of danger that seemed to cling to her like a second skin. Their meeting was not the stuff of romantic ballads, but the genesis of a nightmare, a union forged in shared contempt for the boundaries of civilization, where marriage was less a bond of love than a pact of mutual darkness. When the two disappeared from the known world, it was not to seek refuge from persecution or poverty, but to find a realm where no law could reach them, a hidden dominion where appetites could be indulged without consequence, and where the shrieks of the dying would echo only off stone walls before the relentless tide swallowed them whole. It was on the rugged, unforgiving coastline of Galloway that they found their sanctuary, a network of coastal caves stretching nearly a mile into the earth, cloaked by the rise and fall of the sea, where the entrance vanished beneath high tide, as though nature itself conspired to conceal the horrors festering within. Bean's cave was no mere shelter from the elements. It was a fortress, a labyrinth of twisting passages and black chambers that offered the perfect stage for a reign of terror unrivaled in the annals of true crime and dark history. The kind of setting that fuels countless searches on YouTube for Cannibal Family and Scotland horror story. Inside those damp, echoing tunnels, Alexander and Agnes laid the foundations of a clandestine kingdom, built not with bricks and mortar, but with blood secrecy and an unholy devotion to their own twisted law. Here in perpetual darkness, they plotted how to lure the unwary into the maw of their new dominion, a place where human flesh would become not merely sustenance, but the very essence of power and survival. Sawney Bean did not merely reject society. He sought to create his own, a perverse civilization, stripped of all moral constraints, where survival depended on the blade, and where every traveler on Scotland's lonely roads was reduced to potential prey. This was no band of common thieves lurking in the forests. This was the birth of a predator society that would evolve into something monstrous, something that even the blood-soaked pages of Scotland's history had never dared record, until it was too late. And though the world above continued its turbulent dance of politics and faith, a darker world was taking shape beneath the rocks of Galloway, a world that would soon spill out to stain the roads with blood, leaving behind a legend so horrific that it still commands views and shivers in the darkest corners of YouTube's true crime archives. But what began as the secretive pact between two outcasts would not remain contained, for from the shadows of Bean's Cave would emerge a family whose every heartbeat echoed with the primal hunger for flesh, a family destined to become the most infamous cannibal clan ever recorded, and whose rituals of blood and terror would soon escalate into something far beyond mere survival. Inside the perpetual darkness of Bean's Cave, where the salt air hung heavy with dampness and secrets, Alexander Sawney Bean and Agnes Douglas forged a world utterly severed from human morality, transforming a hollowed fortress of stone into the breeding ground for a nightmare so twisted it would one day haunt true crime documentaries, dark history podcasts, and endless YouTube searches under titles like Most Terrifying Cannibal Family and Unsolved Mysteries of Scotland. In the beginning, the Beans preyed on solitary travelers, merchants burdened with wares, pilgrims clutching rosaries, messengers carrying the fragile threads that bound Scotland's fractured kingdoms. These victims, who vanished along the treacherous roads or the silent coastal paths, could easily be dismissed by the outside world as casualties of wolves bandits or the merciless Scottish wilderness. But to the Bean clan, these strangers represented not merely opportunity, but sacred sustenance. Sawney Bean was methodical in his savagery. He wasted nothing. The human body was not simply flesh, but a resource to be harvested, preserved and consumed piece by piece, transforming human beings into both food and trophies, as though life itself was nothing more than livestock to be butchered. The act of cannibalism evolved from desperate survival into something ritualistic, a dark liturgy performed in chambers where torches cast flickering light on glistening walls, and where the echoes of the cave seemed to sing hymns of blood. In the shadows, Agnes gave birth again and again, filling the cave with children whose eyes would never know the sun, whose skin grew pale as death itself, and whose first lessons were not of language or prayer, but the art of the ambush, the silent kill, and the sanctity of consuming human flesh. These children never heard the laughter of village squares or the tolling of church bells. Instead, they learned the weight of a knife, the taste of human blood, and the vital importance of secrecy that shielded their predator clan from the eyes of the outside world. Within that labyrinth of stone, the Bean progeny grew feral, their senses sharpened to an unnatural degree, able to navigate the darkness without hesitation, communicate through clicks and subtle echoes mimicking the acoustics of dripping water, and track prey by scent alone, becoming creatures caught between humanity and something far more primal. For them, cannibalism was not horror. It was law, religion, and family all fused into a singular truth, a truth that to this day fuels nightmares and viral videos recounting the gruesome existence of this predator society. The cave itself became a grotesque reflection of civilization, partitioned into chambers, each serving a purpose, one for slaughter, another for preservation, others for sleep and breeding, all stained by the same grim purpose. Hooks hammered into stone walls held dismembered arms and legs as though they were sides of beef in a butcher's shop, while torsos were hung separately according to their stage of preparation, some freshly bled, others smoked or salted for longevity. Primitive furnishings were crafted from human bones, and skins were tanned to create coverings that dripped with a macabre artistry, each piece a testament to the clan's absolute rejection of the laws that governed the outside world. Within these shadowy halls, Love as understood by civilized society was a foreign concept, replaced instead by an ironclad tribalism where family loyalty was demanded at the price of silence and blood, where descent meant death, and where incest became not a matter of choice but of necessity, for Sawney Bean understood that keeping his lineage isolated was the only way to preserve the twisted purity of their secret civilization. Children mated with siblings, mothers with sons, and the genetic legacy of the clan spiraled deeper into instability, birthing descendants ever more detached from human empathy and ever more perfect for the dark world in which they were raised. And as the generations multiplied and the clan's hunger grew insatiable, the Bean family would begin to look beyond solitary travelers daring to hunt larger groups and sow terror across the entire southwest of Scotland, an evolution of horror that would transform isolated disappearances into a reign of terror that no kingdom could ignore, a nightmare whose shadow we are about to enter next. As the years slithered forward like shadows creeping across stone, the Bean clan grew in number and in hunger, evolving from a lurking menace preying on lone wanderers into a fully formed predator society, daring enough to strike at the very arteries of Scotland's trade and community life, a transformation so monstrous that it has become the stuff of dark history legends, fueling countless viral searches for cannibal family unsolved mysteries and Scotland horror stories across YouTube and beyond. What began as opportunistic murders of solitary travelers became a sophisticated enterprise of human hunting, a grim orchestration of terror executed with a precision that made them seem less like a band of outlaws and more like a secret army dedicated to the harvest of flesh. The Bean clan learned to read the rhythms of medieval commerce, tracking trade routes with chilling expertise, understanding which caravans carried wealth, which pilgrims might be unguarded, and precisely when isolated villages would be most vulnerable, their men away in fields or at war, leaving only women, children, and the old to fend for themselves. The cave-dwelling clan became predators in every sense of the word, calculating not only how to capture human prey, but how to ensure no word of their existence ever slipped past trembling lips, for dead men tell no tales, and silence was the currency of survival. The techniques honed in Bean's cave were not random acts of slaughter, but an evolving doctrine of predation passed from parent to child in whispered lessons of strategy, patience, and anatomical precision. Victims were often dragged back alive, screaming into the echoing labyrinth because the freshness of flesh was paramount to the clan's ritual feasts, a detail that has echoed through centuries of true crime storytelling as one of the most horrifying aspects of their legend. The luckiest victims died quickly under blades honed for butchery, but many others faced lingering torment as the Beans perfected methods of dismemberment, preservation, and consumption, transforming the cave into a charnel house where human remains were sorted, stored, and consumed with the same meticulous care a butcher might reserve for prized cuts of meat. Arms, legs, torsos, and heads each had their designated places upon hooks, driven into the cold stone, creating grotesque trophies and practical stores of food. A tableau that would one day haunt the minds of investigators and feed the nightmares of dark history enthusiasts the world over. And as the clan's confidence swelled like a tide, their hunting territory expanded dramatically, pushing far beyond the lonely paths and desolate coastlines into the very heart of communities. Entire merchant caravans vanished without a trace, leaving behind scattered wagons and belongings eerily untouched, as though the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Trade routes that had for generations been safe under the protection of royal decree transformed overnight into corridors of terror, and rumors of a predator clan living beneath the rocks began to twist through taverns and markets, breeding fear so potent that it stifled commerce and isolated villages into pockets of suspicion and despair. Yet even these atrocities were merely precursors to the moment the Bean clan decided that hunting individuals and small groups was no longer enough to sate their ravenous appetite, a moment when the secretive predators stepped out of the shadows to strike at a gathering so significant, so audacious, that it would force the entire kingdom to acknowledge that the monsters consuming Scotland's people were not legends or wild beasts, but human beings who had chosen darkness as their kingdom and blood as their law. And it would be this singular savage act that shattered any hope the Bean clan had of remaining hidden. A massacre that still echoes through the pages of Scotland's true crime archives. And that leads us inexorably into the most infamous night in their blood-soaked reign, a night forever remembered as the Wedding Massacre. It was inevitable that the Bean clan's insatiable hunger and growing confidence would one day propel them from the shadows into an act so brazen, so drenched in blood, that it would force Scotland itself to confront the monstrous truth festering along its rugged coast, a truth that would echo through centuries of dark history documentaries, true crime channels, and endless viral searches for Cannibal Family Scotland horror story and medieval massacre. The night of the Wedding Massacre began not as a tale of horror but of joy, a celebration under starlight where laughter and music spilled down the winding roads as a bridal party made their journey homeward, unaware that in the darkness beyond the torchlight, unseen eyes were watching with a hunger older than memory. There were nearly 30 souls in the procession, family, friends, musicians, and children, all adorned in the bright finery of festivity, their spirits buoyed by love and wine, blissfully ignorant that they were about to stumble into the jaws of the most infamous predator clan ever chronicled in Scotland's bloody annals. The Bean clan had tracked them for miles, slithering through the underbrush like shadows given flesh, calculating each movement, waiting for the moment when the torches thinned and the noise of celebration lulled into the gentle hush of exhaustion. And when that moment came, they struck with a ferocity that turned the night into a living hell. Swords glinted beneath the moonlight, knives flashed, and the joyous sounds of wedding songs were choked off by screams as the clan descended upon the revelers like wolves upon a flock, silent at first, then erupting into chaos. Blood sprayed across silk gowns and linen shirts, staining the earth in dark pools as the beans slashed through the crowd with clinical precision, dragging victims toward the tree line, while the rest scattered in terror, not understanding that they were being herded, not merely attacked. Survivors would later recount eyes glinting in the dark, like animals' movements so synchronized that the attackers seemed less human than a single organism, driven by an unholy instinct. There were no demands for ransom, no words spoken, only the relentless violence of a predator clan harvesting its prey. Children were seized, screaming women torn from their husbands' arms, and men cut down as they tried to fight back their blood hissing against steel and soil alike. To the Beans, this was not slaughter, it was procurement, the culmination of years of refining their hunting craft into an art form of horror, a ritualistic gathering of flesh that would stalk the hooks and stone ledges of their subterranean lair. The carnage was so severe that it would forever stand apart from the countless robberies and murders plaguing medieval Scotland, transforming the Beans from whispers in the dark into a name that would sear itself into Scotland's true crime legacy. And though a few escaped bloodied and half-mad to tell the tale, their stories were dismissed at first as hysteria, wild tales spawned from terror and trauma, until the pieces began to align with other disappearances whispered about for decades. Merchants, pilgrims, entire caravans all vanished along routes that now seemed to converge toward one dreadful epicenter, the coast of Galloway. The Wedding Massacre shattered any illusion that the disappearances were mere misfortunes or bandit attacks. For here was a crime so audacious that it could not be ignored, an atrocity that pulled the Bean clan out of legend and into stark, horrifying reality. And as the survivors carried their tales into the halls of nobles and the ears of Scotland's troubled king, a reckoning began to stir, one that would lead royal trackers and hardened soldiers toward the tide-washed caves hiding secrets more monstrous than any tale ever whispered in the flickering glow of a medieval hearth. For in those caves waited not only the killers themselves, but the remains of countless victims, a charnel house so ghastly it would test the sanity of even the bravest men, a descent into darkness that we now must follow next. The blood-soaked night of the Wedding Massacre had shattered the fragile veil of secrecy that had cloaked the Bean clan for a quarter of a century, igniting a wave of terror and furious inquiry that spread from humble village hearths to the marble halls of Edinburgh, where the whispers of a cannibal family stalking Scotland's roads evolved from chilling rumor into undeniable truth, fueling an explosion of dark history fascination and true crime storytelling that still captivates millions searching for Scotland's unsolved mysteries and horror cave discoveries on YouTube. When survivors staggered into towns with wild eyes and tales of attackers who moved as one indifferent to pleas or ransom, determined only to capture living flesh, the kingdom could no longer dismiss these horrors as banditry or superstition. King James I, already grappling with rebellions and political fractures, was forced to confront an atrocity so grotesque it threatened not only lives but the very authority of the crown itself for what kingdom could stand, while an invisible predator clan consumed its people, leaving bones and silence in its wake. Under royal orders, an elite group of soldiers and seasoned trackers, many veterans of the brutal border wars with England, was dispatched to scour the rugged Galloway coastline, guided by survivor accounts and maps marked with ominous gaps where entire caravans had vanished. Days turned into tense, fruitless searches until one fateful pursuit of deer along the cliffs revealed an anomaly, a stretch of rock where the sea seemed to surge and swirl with unnatural force. Drawn by suspicion, the royal hunters investigated and uncovered a hidden mouth in the cliffside, a cavernous wound in the earth that exhaled a stench so vile it staggered even hardened warriors, a scent that would become infamous among historians and horror enthusiasts alike as the gateway to one of Scotland's darkest true crime scenes. Torches were lit, blades drawn, and step by cautious step the soldiers descended into the gloom, their every footfall echoing against wet stone until the narrow passage exploded into a chamber so grotesque it might have been ripped from Dante's nightmares. Bones lay scattered like fallen leaves, skulls stacked in grim monuments to silent victims. And from iron hooks driven into the walls hung dismembered limbs and torsos, some freshly butchered, others shriveled and blackened by smoke, evidence of a decades-long reign of cannibalistic terror. Primitive furniture fashioned from human bones and skins painted the scene with a horror so visceral that even the most seasoned men retched, dropping weapons and fleeing for the sanctuary of clean air and daylight. And then from deeper shadows they came, the Bean Clan themselves, 48 figures emerging one by one, their pallid skin nearly translucent from years hidden away from the sun eyes, reflecting torchlight like predators in the dark, moving with an eerie fluidity that blurred the line between man and beast. The youngest among them, children born into absolute darkness, watched the intruders not with fear, but with curiosity, as though puzzled that anyone could find their grisly larder monstrous. Agnes Douglas, now ancient yet radiating a terrible authority, stepped forward as the clan's voice, her speech twisted by decades of isolation into a dialect barely recognizable as Scots, revealing no remorse, no understanding that the soldier's horror stemmed from acts she considered as natural as breathing. It was a confrontation that historians and true crime researchers still analyze as one of the most chilling intersections between law and unspeakable human depravity. A moment when civilization gazed into the abyss and found monsters staring back. King James I, upon receiving word of the horror discovered in the cave, made a swift and merciless decision. There would be no trial for creatures who had placed themselves so far outside humanity's laws, were to be denied humanity's protections. The men of the clan were sentenced to have their hands and feet severed before being left to bleed to death, while the women and children were condemned to the flames, forced to watch the men die before the fire claimed them too. Executioners, men accustomed to medieval brutality, faltered in their duty as the Bean Clan met their end without weeping, or pleas for mercy, the children staring wide-eyed at flames, as though observing a curiosity rather than facing oblivion. The spectacle witnessed by crowds drawn from across Scotland was meant as both punishment and warning, yet it left behind a scar not of relief, but of something darker, a lingering fear that civilization's thin skin could be torn away at any moment to reveal the savage beast beneath. And though the Bean Clan's reign was ended in blood and fire, the echoes of their crimes would ripple through Scottish society for generations, leaving scars far deeper than even the soldiers who had descended into that charnel cave could comprehend, and preparing the stage for a reckoning of conscience and memory that we must now explore. Though the flames that devoured the Bean Clan may have flickered out centuries ago, the shadows they cast stretched far beyond their lifetimes, leaving scars across the psyche of Scotland and searing their tale into the fabric of dark history, where it continues to haunt true crime, obsessives, folklore researchers, and viral YouTube audiences, searching relentlessly for unsolved mysteries, cannibal family horrors, and psychological horror stories from Scotland's past. In the aftermath of their execution, an eerie silence fell over the regions once stalked by Sawney Bean's progeny. Yet it was not the silence of peace, but the uneasy quiet of a people grappling with the realization that civilization's boundaries were far thinner, far more fragile than anyone had dared to believe. Trade routes that had lain dormant during the clan's reign of terror struggled for years to revive merchants hesitating to reclaim roads, still echoing with rumors of vanished caravans and slaughtered pilgrims, while entire communities once thriving remained little more than ghost towns permanently depopulated by fear and economic collapse. Families who had lost sons, daughters, and fathers to the darkness found neither comfort nor closure in the Bean Clan's execution, for there remained no graves to tend, no bodies to mourn, only the hollow knowledge that loved ones had disappeared into an abyss of human savagery. The psychological wounds inflicted by the Bean Clan burrowed deeper than any sword-cut, planting seeds of suspicion and dread that would fester across generations, spawning countless legends and cautionary tales, whispered beside hearthfires, warning that evil was not always some monstrous beast lurking in the wilderness, but could spring from human hearts left untethered from conscience and community. Religious leaders seized upon the Bean Clan's story as both proof of humanity's capacity for evil and a stark lesson in what happens when God's laws are forsaken. Sermons thundered across pulpits, declaring that the cannibal family had been instruments of Satan himself, a divine punishment for society's sins, or the result of witchcraft breeding monsters beneath Scotland's sacred soil. Meanwhile, scholars and legal minds wrestled with moral quandaries the Bean Clan left in their wake. Were the children born in the darkness of that cave guilty of crimes they never chose? Or were they victims trapped in a prison of flesh and blood inherited from their parents? The question continues to echo through true crime forums and dark history documentaries, where modern psychologists draw parallels between the Beans and modern cases of severe familial abuse and isolation, seeing in their story a terrifying template for how human beings severed from society can devolve into something almost unrecognizable. Archaeologists have attempted for decades to locate definitive evidence tying specific human remains to the Bean Clan's crimes, yet the labyrinthine caves of Galloway remain as stubborn and silent as ever-yielding fragments of bone, but refusing to confirm beyond all doubt that these were indeed the remains of Sawney Bean's countless victims. Some historians suggest that the Bean Clan legend may be a conflation of multiple criminal families or exaggerated folklore spun to explain widespread disappearances in medieval Scotland, but even they admit that the sheer consistency of details across chronicles and testimonies suggests a terrifying truth beneath the legend. And so the story endures an undying ember in the furnace of human imagination, reminding us that beneath the thin skin of civilization lurks a darkness waiting for the right conditions to awaken a truth that keeps Scotland's darkest secret alive in endless YouTube videos, horror podcasts, and viral discussions seeking to unravel whether the real monster is the Bean Clan, or the terrifying possibility that any of us given enough desperation and isolation might become monsters ourselves. Yet even as centuries pass, visitors still seek out the coastal caves, compelled by the need to stand where darkness once reigned. Many leaving with a chilling sense that the evil birthed there has never truly died, an unsettling feeling that leads us inevitably to ponder the most haunting question of all, a question that lingers as we prepare to close this tale. In the end, the tale of Sawney Bean and his cannibal clan isn't merely a story of blood and darkness, but a chilling mirror held up to all of us, reminding us that the line dividing civilization and savagery is thinner than we wish to believe. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that monsters aren't always creatures lurking in forests or caves. Sometimes they're born from desperation, isolation, and a slow erosion of humanity, a darkness that can dwell inside any one of us if the world around us collapses. Yet perhaps the most powerful lesson buried beneath this dark history is that vigilance, community, and compassion are the fragile threads that hold back the abyss. The Bean Clan's legacy whispers that, as long as we stand watch for one another, the caves where such evils hide remain sealed. But tell me, what do you believe were the children of the Bean Clan monsters or victims of a fate they never chose? Do you think stories like this are pure legend or chilling echoes of humanity's hidden truths? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your theories and reflections on this twisted piece of Scotland's true crime past. And if tales of dark history and unsolved mysteries captivate you as much as they do me, don't forget to subscribe, save this video for later chills, and share it with someone brave enough to stare into humanity's darkest shadows, because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that turn out to be true.